Welcome to Whole Earth Healing Radio. I'm your host, CJ Miller, and we're here to bring you a more holistic perspective and an outlook on the world and the cosmos, with interviews and discussions with some of today's most inspiring minds in the fields of alternative health and healing, spirituality and consciousness, green living, new science, truth, and more. Today we have with us a very special guest. We have Neil Kramer, an English writer, philosopher, and teacher who lectures and speaks widely around the globe regarding issues such as consciousness, ancient mystical disciplines, shamanism, metaphysics, inner alchemy, and beyond. Neil has traveled extensively and shares his deep insights about humanity, our ancient and recent history, and our current predicament in a very thought-provoking and laid-back manner. Today is May 31st, 2012, and we'll be talking with Neil Kramer about his latest book, The Unfoldment, The Organic Path to Clarity, Power, and Transformation. So for those of you who are familiar with Neil Kramer's work, this book will be a welcome integration of his theories and ideas. And for those of you who are new to Neil Kramer, I think you're really going to like this too, because this book really it can speak to a lot of different kinds of people. It has wonderful tools for going deep and for exploring consciousness, and it's very inspiring. So I'm really happy to have Neil Kramer here with me today, and welcome. So hello, Neil. Thank you for being with us today on Whole Earth Healing Radio.
Hi, Claudia. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Great. So we have some time today to discuss your current views and the path you're on right now. One of the most recent developments for you, Neil, is your latest book, The Unfoldment. And I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say, and what would you like to open with today in talking about your book?
Well, the book for me is obviously a synthesis of my views and perspectives about personal development, spirituality, consciousness, some of the illusory aspects of the world, how to see them, what they are, where they come from, what we can do about them. And it's a very positive take on things. I think it's very important at the moment that it's very easy to lose oneself in doom and gloom and just moan about things and say, oh God, we're all screwed, really. You know, what on earth are we going to do? And there's these overwhelming forces against the individual. And I really don't see things that way at all. And so, if nothing else, this book is my endeavor to say, okay, people, we can totally do this thing, this creative, special ascendance thing that human beings are here for, in my humble opinion. And there's nothing really stopping you, nothing at all. And all the shadows and the darkness and the doom and the control are sort of accelerators for growth at a higher level when you step outside of your own immediate, physiological wants and needs. All those difficult, challenging aspects of the world we find ourselves in are sort of like clues to say, isn't this crazy? Isn't this so absurd that it's actually a bit suspicious? Therefore, what's actually going on behind the scenes, not just at the physical level, but at the metaphysical level, at the overall upper mind level, what's occurring here? And so the book really takes it an approach of self-power, of self-empowerment, and of self-determination in a very, very rigorous way. And yet, I've written it in such a way that I would hope that anybody really can pick it up and access it and read it. And so if you're a kind of mainstream person, you're going to find this an interesting, thought-provoking, heartfelt read, an interesting look at the world. If you're esoterically informed and you've educated yourself in matters of new thought, shall we say, and consciousness, and maybe you understand some conspiracy and New World Order type affairs, then you're going to see much deeper layers in this book. You're going to appreciate more and think, yeah, I see what he's talking about. There's another level to this. So my favorite works that I've read over the years, they did that. They welcomed everyone to read it, but there was clearly a subtext for the more analytical, shall we say, from a spiritual angle, at the more intermediate or advanced students could access it. So when I've been that student and I've read it, I thought, wow, that's a nice way of doing it. So that's what I've tried to do with this book.
I think that's so important to be able to reach many different types of people, especially now in 2012, when there's so many people waking up and creating new ways of navigating their lives. People do need tools and information and inspiration, and you've definitely been an inspiration to me. And, a lot of that's come for me from your spoken word. And I can remember listening to interviews from as far back as 2008 with you. And as I was reading the book, I was reflecting back on that. And now I'm wondering, how do you feel your work has changed and coalesced in the writing of this book?
Okay. Well, that's an interesting question, particularly if you've been kind of following some of my material from 2008. I started putting stuff out in 2006, and here we are now in 2012, which for mature people like myself, I don't know how old you are, but mature old farts like myself, it's a very, very, very short amount of time. But for younger people, and in terms of technology and in terms of media, the landscape has massively transformed in those last 6 years. And it just seems like so completely different now. The seed of the material, which is awaken oneself, be authentic, engage with what is real, and act with honor. The seed is the same as it was then. But clearly, if you look back, I mean, some of the older stuff is not online at the moment. It's just in an offline archive, because I originally started with a blog called The Cleaver, and I put essays on there. And then as people started to read those, people interviewed me about various topics, and then I put the interviews on there and so on. And then a little while ago, I decided to just have a sort of Neil Kramer website to expand on what I do and put some other aspects of my work in there, and ported all that old stuff over. But I had to sort of do it manually. So I left out the very oldest stuff, and I think I took it from sort of 2009 onwards, really. So there's like 2 or 3 years of stuff that isn't on there. But I actually had occasion to look back at some of my early essays, and as one might expect, occasionally you look at them and think, oh my God, did I write that? That is just pants, as we say in the northwest of England. And you just think, goodness me. But you can look at it and say, I guess it's like a band who, have got better and more refined, and the message becomes truer and more artistically appealing. And then you look back at your first album and think, well, it isn't brilliant, but it was full of heart and it was full of this energy. So it's kind of like punk. If you listen to punk music, it isn't very complicated usually, and it isn't very stylish, shall we say, and it certainly isn't very articulate. And yet the energy and the power and the intent of it is absolutely still there. So if you listen to punk albums from the 70s, they still do it today. They still work today. So I like to think that if I look back at them, what I was writing, the sense of it is still as well meant then as it is today. The subject matter clearly has changed. Initially, in my spiritual path, it was a very personal business, my personal unfoldment, my spiritual education and path in life. And separate to that, I would look at politics and esoteric meanderings in government and links to secret societies and mystical symbolism and what now we call synchromysticism and these different things. And I basically saw in Britain a country that was being very, very quickly turned into a fascist state. And I believe that process has been completed now. And it is a very, very different place to the place it was even 10 years ago. So in those 6 years, it has hugely changed. And in 2006, I have to say that the impetus to publish material and to say this is a world that is not true, the impetus to do that came from my disdain for political shenanigans in Britain at the time. And they were trying to essentially take all weapons away from the people. And of course, if you lived in a society that was sane and brilliant and your government genuinely represented the people and they were, by the people, for the people and all that stuff, then it would make sense, of course. Why on earth would we want weapons? But that isn't the case. And I saw it very clearly as a strategy for disarmament. And that worried me because it wasn't just about guns, which were the first to go. Now, you really can't have any firearms in England at all, really. Even to have a shotgun, you need a license and a certification of mental stability and stuff. And if you get caught with a pistol in the street, you go to jail. Simple as that, no questions. And that state of affairs is symptomatic not of gun control. It's nothing to do with that. It's to do with liberty, and it's to do with freedom. And anyone who knows about European gun laws, there's a correlation between gun laws and political authenticity, in my view, which is a bit of a funny thing to hear a spiritual person say. But that was the genesis of the Cleaver blog, to say there's something else going on here. It's not about guns, it's not about stuff like that, but they represent something here, and let's track what that is. If you now fast forward years and years later, I rarely talk about any of that stuff anymore, unless an interviewer will specifically say, what do you think about the riots in Britain in summer? What do you think about David Cameron's, submission to the European superstate and the end of Britain as a sovereign nation? I can talk about those things, and I am interested in them, but my focus has definitely switched to the root of those things, which is spirit, which is consciousness. And that's where the resolution lies, that's where the answers are, that's where the problems emanate from, and everything goes back to that state. And the closer I've got to the root of those things, the closer it's brought me to an understanding that what seemed very separate from me as a young man in my 20s, say, a long time ago, actually isn't. It's absolutely enmeshed in my consciousness. What goes on in Whitehall and in Parliament and in the Senate and Capitol Hill are absolutely enmeshed personally, intimately, privately in my life. There's no separation at all. So if I really do care about what's going on, not just want to grumble and shake my fist at the newspaper now and again, but really, really want to do something, then this is my tactic, which is to go to the root of where all that stuff emanates from, which is what the mystics would perhaps call ultimate reality, or a fourth density state where form emanates from. And that's my tactic. I thought it would be more effective than putting a mask on and taking a rifle and running around shooting people and blowing things up, which probably would make me feel a lot better for a very short period of time, but would do nothing at all. So the form of terrorism that I've chosen is more radical, more profound, and actually has brought me to a place of real positivity and encouragement. And I've realized that it isn't quite the stark black and white scenario of good and evil that many Americans and Britons in particular like to think it is. It's not quite as simple as that. It's more interesting than that. So if somebody was a real Neil Kramer sort of follower, in the sense that they follow the material, not the man, of course, you would definitely see that you'd be able to track that movement of energy and that movement of words and that modification of subject matter, and say, yeah, clearly this guy is changing. And that's my personal sort of marker for evolution and success personally for me, in that I want to look back at what I did a year ago and think, well, there's no way I'm doing that anymore, but that was okay. Now it's much better. And every year I have to be able to say that to myself, or I can't sleep at night. So I have to see that at certain milestones in my personal path, and it's nothing to do with anyone else, it's just for me, that I can look back and think, goodness me, what a massive distance I've covered. That's pretty cool. I'm happy with that. And then my own personal quality bar is so high that if I think it's quite good, it might be for other people as well who are doing similar things. And sharing that journey is all all we ever really do when we put stuff out there, has brought an awful lot of positive feedback. So people seem to enjoy it and find inspiration and heart in it.
Well, sure, and the sharing is the great thing because you have inspired many other people, and I think you also can give people a sense that they can do it too. And, for myself, I feel I have permission from listening to you. I just felt like I really have permission to do this work, and that looking into myself and the spiritual side of life and not having a 9 to 5 job is not a selfish thing, that it's actually something that does create a ripple effect in the field of consciousness. And you're a great role model of that.
Thank you. Well, I think that's a very important thing, and thanks for the compliment.
Sure.
But what I'm trying to do is say, when you realize that there is this grid, there is this membrane of energy, and that really there's no separate bits of it. It's all one huge multi-dimensional membrane wiggling through the universe, this emanation from source, and that everything's connected to everything else because it's all part of this membrane. Then, even as Bill Hicks said, the idea of blowing parts of it up and killing parts of it and sectioning bits of it off and categorizing things and saying, well, this is a good bit and this is a bad bit, and this bit is nice and this bit is horrible. It becomes silly, that. It becomes not appropriate anymore. And that is a spiritual teaching that, particularly in Hinduism, which is the sort of one of the richest sources and the oldest sources of spiritual narrative we have, the Hindus very carefully mapped all this out in the cycles and the ways of describing it, and the holy men who would discuss and contemplate this material. And this is a long time ago, thousands of years ago, and that language is very difficult to interpret now. If you go back and read the Vedas, there's some of the most uninspiring, dull reading matter you could possibly imagine. And I was tipped off about this like 10 years ago, and it's absolutely true. Now I've read a lot of it. I mean, there's too much to read all of it, but if you go to the classical scriptures, if you like, it's very, very bizarrely written, and it's very difficult to translate into modern cultural references. Very difficult. So part of what I do is say, well, really, as soon as you get into wisdom, you realize that every time you make contact or discover a piece of wisdom, although the discovery is yours, the wisdom itself is usually ancient. And so every time somebody finds something phenomenal, it's usually very, very old, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's been buried for a long time, and if it's been not referenced, it certainly feels new, and it certainly feels like one's own invention, but that's something that I've learned more and more with a kind of smile on my face is not the case. It's just something that you've found and thought, wow, this is very, very relevant at the moment, and yet it was something that was discussed 4,000 years ago, and yet it absolutely applies to Angela Merkel and David Cameron and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and how they're conducting themselves and what they represent as part of a spiritual poverty that has come upon us through our own doing. It's absolutely relevant, that narrative, to today's capitalist industrial narrative. It's absolutely enlightening in that when you start to look at this, there's a comfort we can draw from the fact that our ancestors, our real people ancestors, not historians necessarily, not government officials necessarily, but the people, they also saw this, and they wrote about it, and they gave record of it, and they created myths and stories and narratives and documents about it. And you can think, wow, so all this stuff is nothing new, really. I mean, it's unique in the colours and textures and tones that we have now, of course. They're always unique. But the underlying principles of it do seem cyclical. They come back time and time again, and there's a purpose for it, and there's a reason for it. And as soon as you get that, the idea that you could really behave selfishly at all by deepening your own consciousness is crazy. It's not possible. The more you work on your own clarity and truth, every single time you take a step out the door, every time you open your mouth, every time you have a thought without going anywhere, that, as you call it, the ripple effect, affects everything else because we're all in this membrane. So you go around as this node of awareness and truth to say, well, if you can do truth, then I'm going to resonate with you. And if you can't, this isn't going to happen. So you create a dissonance against untruth as you move through the world.
So a dissonance against untruth. That's interesting. Can you say more about that?
Well, if you imagine that you're like, your note of truth is like whatever, F sharp, and the untruth is, B flat, and you play those together, it's going to sound a bit weird or whatever. And it becomes dissonant and it doesn't sound quite the way you wanted it to. And you realize it's like when you just like somebody or when you love somebody. Why does that happen? It's because there's a tremendous parallel in the vibration of your consciousness, if you like, your brain waves, the way you comport yourself, the way you speak, things you're interested in, the music you like, the way you move, everything. What food turns you on, what food turns you off, all those things are emanations of the same single vibration to say, well, this is my energy signature. And you can be very physical about that if you want, and you can map that down with instrumentation and say, well, it sounds a bit new agey when you talk about vibrations and shit. So sometimes people need to clarify what that is. And as I say, you could use instrumentation to say, well, let's take 25 different readings from aspects, the telemetrics or whatever of the body, of the brain wave, of the patterns of consciousness, of your beta waves and alpha waves, of your blood pressure, of your pheromones, of your testosterone, all those different things, and let's compose an energy signature, which is a composite of those different things. Let's say that's one way of doing it. If you find a match with somebody else, it means that there's a parallel, there's a harmonic resonance with somebody else. And those people, we like them. And sometimes we just walk past them in the street, and it's not just a sex thing. You look at them and just think, you're cool. I just like you. I would like to, and then that's it, they've gone. It doesn't matter, but you can feel it. And a short way of saying it, you can feel your tribal members. You can feel people in your spiritual family. That's a nice, warm, fuzzy way of saying it. But really what we're talking about is where there's a harmonic energy signature, you magnetize more of that to you, and you propel away what is not relevant. And so more and more and more, as you move through the universe, physically and mentally and spiritually, as you do that, you bring this truth and this clarity, and you channel this divinity more and more into what you do. And again, everybody who listens to me will be familiar that happens at a very abstract, high level, but it also happens at a very domestic level as well, when you're just going about your daily business and buying food and paying bills and, going to the counter in the library or whatever, all those things become influenced heavily by the work you're doing on yourself. You see more, you move in a richer world, and you can feel when somebody needs something from you, and you are less distinguishing between service to self and service to others. You realize that it's all service, really, and that in serving yourself, you do serve others, but only when it's with integrity and honor and sovereignty. Serving others is really about having high perception of knowing when somebody needs something, and that it's appropriate to give something to that person, whether it's words of encouragement or a hug or love or intelligent conversation or a little bit more sensitivity than usual. And that's all directly related to how heavily you work upon yourself. And we need that right now. We need that level of vigilance in this cultural paradigm, because it wants us to do the opposite, which is isolate and switch off and leave the links to technology, to Twitter and your cell phone and Android and iPhones, and they're very useful. We're using Skype and stuff now to do this. Great, nice technology, but there's no way that I would allow that to become pivotal to my social framework. and I don't think anyone else should either.
Oh, clearly it's very important to stay connected to people in a real and authentic way. And that makes me think about relationships. And I wonder what you think about, as people change and grow spiritually, oftentimes relationships change and grow and maybe don't fit us so well anymore. And just wondering what you think about that and how one should manage communicating with people around those type of issues.
Well, you're speaking very diplomatically there, aren't you? But actually, it's massively affecting, isn't it, in our personal lives, that as you work on yourself and as you become a clearer channel for consciousness, you absolutely separate yourself out on a conscious level from other people. And the things that used to be fun and okay aren't anymore. And the things that used to be scary and weird suddenly become exciting and something that you're attracted to. And so all your social rules change, and old friends, old loyal friends, and husbands and wives and boyfriends and girlfriends, all that changes as well. And you think, well, is it okay to hang out with this person who's thick as shit, who's ignorant, and who has no interest in the universe and their place in it? Is that okay or not? And you have to look at that and ask yourself that question. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't, and it depends on what your relationship is and what you're doing with that person. And for me, for example, most of my friends are very conscious, and I'm very glad about that. And that's part of being open to creating that situation, not waiting for them to find me and not going out and seeking them, but being aware of when it's happening in front of your face. To sit across a table from somebody, or to meet someone in the street, or to chat with somebody at a conference or something. I'm just the same as everyone else. I can feel when there's a very close energetic match and just think, you and I, have a connection. And you have to be aware of that to be able to nurture those things. And if you are, then the natural flow of people who come and people who go is more pleasing, shall we say, in that you realize that you're not going to live in the same house all your life. You're not going to have the same car all your life. You're not going to read the same kind of books. You're not going to be with the same sort of people all your life. Of course you're not. Everything changes. All things come and go. And I have very much lived that as well. And some very special individuals, usually women, have come into my life, and I've become very, very, very intimate and close to them, and then they've gone away again, or I've gone away, or we have parted company, and where we were both heading north, suddenly I start going northwest and they're going southeast, and there's nothing you can do about it. You have to tell the truth and acknowledge that and think, well, this is really kind of sad and weird and different, but this is the way it is, and it's kind of nobody's fault, really. You can't grab somebody by the collar and pick them up and take them your direction. That would be inappropriate selfishness. So you have to respect that everybody's on this completely unique setting, this route, this path, this trajectory, this compass bearing, and you don't really know where anyone else's is. You haven't got a clue. You might have a faint intuition of your own, and that's about it. When you feel that somebody is heading in your spiritual direction, shall we say, and that there is that energetic match, you just think, well, this is wonderful, because for all those who go, new people come as well. And a nice way of looking at it for me, because obviously this phenomena of people coming and going affects my life just like anyone else's. The way I look at it is that really, as a human being on Earth, particularly as one who is focused chiefly on consciousness, if you're a person like that, all you really have is the time that you're given. And in my view, the time you give yourself. But it feels like the time you have been given, the time one has been given. That's it. You've just got time. What you do with that time is all you have to decide from one moment to the next, from 1 week to the next, from 1 year to the next. And so spending that sacred gift of life with particular people is a very powerful, sacred act. And so if you're conscious of that, You can't do anything more impressive and wonderful than spend time with someone else, particularly like, somebody special, and you marry them, or it's your girlfriend, or it's your best mate, or it's your buddy, or it's your, friend who you go to the bar and watch the football with, whatever. It doesn't matter. That's your gift. That's it, time. And if you're spending that with somebody, then it's a very special, focused, conscious thing. If you don't like somebody and you feel that the energy signature doesn't match, and you feel that you aren't really helping them and they're not helping you, then why the hell would you spend any time with that person? You have to take it upon yourself to say, I'm out of here. It's time to move on. And as a mature, sensitive, brilliant human being, of course, we try and do that with some courage, of course, because you can't do it without that at all, but also with some sort of civility and sensitivity and understanding, and make these entrances and exits with as much grace and fluidity as possible. We don't want to just disappear, particularly if you've married the person and had 5 kids with them. You can't really do that. You have to work at different ways of achieving a different kind of harmony. And I believe if you have found yourself with a tremendous amount of responsibilities and commitments that you cannot walk away from, there's a very good reason for that. And to engage fully with those self-created responsibilities is what that's about. And it's very, very important to do that. And it's nothing wrong. It's not any sort of karmic baggage. It's to say part of your anthropological study as a human conscious entity is to understand the connections between other people. Some conscious, some not conscious. Some cool, some uncool. And that's your study. And to make sure you do it, you become absolutely attached to it physically in your real life. It's your son, it's your mother, it's your auntie, it's your sister, it's your boss, it's your friend. And those connections compel you to analyze what's going on. So rather than just moaning about it and feeling the weight of it, the trick is to look deeply into what's actually going on. What is the energy here? What are people motivated by? What's the dynamic? Now, there is another set of people who are the opposite of that, who are people who have very fiercely created a situation for themselves where they don't have any responsibilities as such, other than the obvious ethical and simple principles of conducting yourself in a good way. But aside from that, you don't have any kids, you don't have any relationship issues, you don't have any debts, you don't have anything. You can do whatever you want and go wherever you want. And for those people have a special extra responsibility to do something bloody worthwhile with that time and that freedom. So I fall a little bit into that category, although I have my commitments that I have happily made. But with my freedom of movement and time, I make damn sure that I am an asset to myself and my community and my family and my state, even now I'm here, and that I do something worthwhile and that I become something that is constructive and creational, rather than just purely self-serving or seeking a little hermitage somewhere where I can escape from it all. That's not the game here. The game is one of involvement, not hiding. And I think when you shift into that way of thinking, a lot of what used to look like very grey, difficult problems become challenges to get your teeth into and become something, well, this is a fascinating problem. It's like Sherlock Holmes looking at some murder and there's like a sort of gun on the floor and there's a footprint on the window ledge and there's a crack on the mirror and you're thinking, right, wow, this is interesting. Let me try and piece this together and figure out what's going on here, Mm-hmm. So you have to have that sort of spiritual detective attitude, I think, to it.
Wow, yeah. It's it's hard to, I think, sometimes translate to the people in our lives, as we are changing so much. Just what the new things that we've learned. I mean, just for myself, I am in the last year, I've stopped watching television.
Woohoo!
And yeah, thank you. It's like, and you really do notice a huge difference those times that I do like watch a movie on demand or watch something
Hmm.
on HBO. And usually it's not regular television with commercials. I don't even do that. But I do have a kind of an ill feeling when I watch television, and especially the news. I mean, it's always negative and fear laden. So, and I think when I try to describe that to people in my life that are very much still caught up in that in the media, they really, I don't know, it's hard to say it in a way without offending people, you
Yeah,
know?
it is, and they simply don't get it, do they? If
No.
you say to someone, TV, I've stopped watching it, and wow, now I've gone back to looking at it now and again, here and there, in a hotel or at a friend's house or something. Wow, it's kind of toxic and bad. Don't you think that? And they're like, yeah, well, TV, it's all gone downhill on it, but oh well, anyway. And they totally, totally don't understand quite the principle of what you're saying, because
Hmm.
to understand it, you have to have cleared your, if you pardon the pun, channel. Yeah, you
Hmm.
have to totally and utterly extricate yourself from its kind of shackles, really, and you have to realize that yes, there is information on the screen, yes, there's entertainment and there's pixels and colors and sounds, but there is a signal as well. There is a
Hmm.
signal of unreality that is saying this is the way the world is, and every single thing you're watching, whether it's like you said, drama, a quality drama on HBO, or nonsense Fox News, or half decent BBC News, or if it's hoarders, or if it's a program about guns, or if it's a program about Bigfoot, which is just shockingly bad, by the way, on the History Channel. I watched it the other day,
I'll have to check it
in a
out.
hotel, I hasten to add. Really, really, bizarre diversity of things out there, but they all do the same thing, which is say, this is the way reality is. And essentially, it's a lie, and it's a intentional lie. It's misinformation, yeah? And that problem infects the mind to a degree where you don't realize you're infected until you become disinfected, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
So until you've stepped away from it, you don't quite realize what it was doing to you and what effect it was having. And I've told stories about this, I won't repeat them, but you resensitize yourself to the world. And when you go back and see a very popular show like NCIS or Special Crime Unit or whatever, it's full of the most harrowing, weird, horrid rape and murder and brutality week in, week out, every night,
Hmm.
and people, children, school kids, mums and dads, pensioners, they all watch it.
I know. Yeah, I used to really like that show, Law and Order S. I always say SUV, even though I is SVU, right? um,
Special Victims Unit, that's right,
exactly,
yeah.
Special Victims Unit. And in my extended family, a lot of people like it. My mother watches it constantly. My sister and her three children. So it's a big theme in our lives, Law and Order. And I used to like it, but I tried to watch it again recently, and this is so sad. And then it just, as you've talked about I remember in one of your interviews on Red Ice Radio about reality tunnels. And, I really can see how the mainstream media can create a very scary, fear laden, and problem laden reality tunnel for us to channel our energy into.
It is. Well, somebody just said to me actually yesterday, they reminded me of something, which was that the brain doesn't strictly differentiate between what it sees in a dream,
Mhm.
what it sees on a screen, and what it sees in front of your own eyes in commas, inverted commas, real life. It doesn't differentiate between the screen, the imagination, and the actual optical, nerves and the nervous system and the brain. It doesn't make clear distinctions between those things. In other words, what you see on a screen gets processed by the brain as if you were actually watching it right there in front of you, as if it was
Mhm.
happening in the room in front of your eyes. So if your input is filled with violence and um, toxicity, And most of the very unpleasant nature of television, I have to say, is in the kind of focus it seems to be on the very most crude level of human beings, the very thickest, most villainous and pathetic excuses for human entities I've ever seen. One of which is real mob wives.
Oh God.
I'm giving away my dirty secrets here, but what I sometimes do is, having travelled a lot, which perhaps we'll come to talk about that later, as you mentioned, but you inevitably find yourself in other people's homes and in lobbies and in restaurants and diners and hotel rooms and stuff like that. Sounds very sort of glamorous if you rarely do things like that, but it isn't at all. It's usually you're in there, you collapse from exhaustion, get 7 hours sleep, wake up and get on the ferry or get on the plane or go and do some stuff. And so it's very utilitarian, really. But I do take those occasions sometimes to look at the broadcast, to look at the unreality signal and track what the memes are, what are the narratives of the moment. And where it was very heavily focused, I would say, 10 years ago at 2000, 2001, 2002 on cop shows and violence and stuff and thrillers and people getting kidnapped and saved and cold cases being put up and all that. I think that the current thing is on, to some degree, not just sensationalizing but glorifying ignorance in human beings. I think a lot of television, if you look at it now, is a glorification of ignorance. And I think that is brilliant in terms of making people even thicker than they already are. I think that's a very, very clever way of doing it. And it makes perfect sense. It's very simple. All professional, brilliant control mechanisms are simple. They don't need to be sophisticated. And that glorification of ignorance and moronic behavior is on nearly every channel now, on nearly every network, and it's just stunningly, propagated throughout all American and European television now. And American and European TV really finds its way through the funding process of, largely the west and east coasts of the States to everywhere else, to the Arab world, to little outposts in Eastern Europe and Southern Europe, and to Asia and Africa and everywhere else. So our TV becomes, in a way, everyone else's TV, even though they have their own crappy channels. Most of the big shows are American and European, and that's the way it is. And so you're watching the narrative, the global narrative in the crucible. When you watch a show that's airing at the moment and all the posters are in the subway in New York, and I know, as we discussed before we came on the show, that I know where you are in New York, and you know that on all the bus stops and all the subways and everywhere else, there's like, this is the big thing at the moment. This is the big show at the moment. It's whatever, Game of Thrones or Walking Dead or whatever, right? And there's all these images there, and there's the zombie meme, and there's the medieval meme, and there's the kidnap meme, and there's the war meme, and it's all very, very bizarre and peculiar. When you turn that off from your life personally as a source of information and entertainment, you notice how insidious it is. And you notice that it wasn't really doing anything for you. Its entertainment value was very, very thin indeed. You are far better if one enjoys films, which I very much do, choosing your own stuff and watching it either on demand, as they like to say, which I think is a funny sequence of words to describe what's actually going on. But to watch it offline, essentially, to say, I am now going to sit down and watch Attack of the 50-Foot Woman from the 1950s, because that's something that I want to do. Great, you've chosen it, well done, sit down and watch it. That's okay. That's something that you have created the parameters for. The worst thing you can do is sit down and channel surf. And I do that still, like a complete dick. I still do that and fall into that now and again. I don't do it at home, though, because there isn't a television in my home, and there hasn't been for many, many years. But
that's good.
To see what's on and to try and find something good And to consistently not be able to do that, and to have, even when you do find something, interrupted every 7 minutes, I think it is, or 6 minutes now, by commercial breaks, is insane. It's absolutely unwatchable unless you record stuff or watch offline MP4s or AVIs or whatever. It's unwatchable. Live broadcast television, to me, is unwatchable.
I would have to agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think it's a great tool to manipulate people through mind control and hypnosis. I mean, TV is one of the greatest hypnotic tools ever created. I'm not sure that when they first, it makes me wonder if when they first created TV, they knew that they were going to use it for this purpose or not, or if it just sort of turned into that over the years.
Well, it's like anything, isn't it? It's like saying Henry Ford's gonna create this motor car, this motorized cart with a spontaneous combustion engine in it, and we'll make damn sure that for as long as possible, people are going to use this mode of transport, which in 2012 is ludicrous, that we're driving around with engines that work on this silly old principle. It's ludicrous. It's who gets in on the act, isn't it? It's who's financing it and what they're trying to achieve. And with television, it's always been toxic, as far as I'm concerned, and it's always been a fake version of reality. In the 1950s and 60s in Britain, for example, the news announcers would have to wear dinner suits when they announced the news on the British Broadcasting Corporation's television network. And they would speak in this very clipped, very posh BBC accent. Hello and welcome to the BBC. Today, the weather, Yeah. And it's like, well, some people speak like that, but most people don't speak like that. All the people in Scotland don't, in Wales don't, in the north of England don't, in Ireland don't, in the Midlands don't, in Devon and Cornwall and Anglia, they don't. There are some people in London who speak like that, and in those counties surrounding that conurbation, but it wasn't representative. And so people started to confuse what was being broadcast as the way things are. And I think that's the problem with television, that people think they can make a clear distinction, but they can't. They think unconsciously that what comes through the television is the real world, and it isn't, and it's a long way from the real world. And that's why you have to turn it off, to say, well, if you're interested in your own spiritual progress, and if you're interested in a more fulfilling and exciting and juicy way of life, because that's really what this is about on a physical level as well, then you have to turn the television off. You can't do it with the television, because you will infect your mind to such a degree that the sort of fourth dimensional maneuvers, sounds a bit exotic that, but the sort of fourth density consciousness, the higher consciousness, the clearer consciousness that is required on that path, you're not going to be able to do it, because the static that the television creates in that bridge between the 3 and the 4D is insurmountable. That's what it's for. Entertainment is a byproduct of television. What it's for is to create mental static, to keep people where they are. And it doesn't matter what you watch. You could watch a lovely program about fucking seahorses in the Atlantic Ocean, which you think, oh God, isn't that lovely? Or you could watch some, kind of filthy, ridiculous show about, gang violence or something. I think, well, that's not really getting anything, and people are getting blown off and put inside tires and set on fire and doused with petrol, and I'm not sure what I'm getting from this. I'm not learning anything, but I'm seeing a lot of violence and bloodshed. Whatever you're watching, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. The fact that you're participating in that unreality signal creates this mental static which stops your psychic abilities from presenting themselves, and it keeps you as just, a sort of chemical robot, really, which is okay. If you want to do that, great, good luck to you. And I do actually mean that. Great, cool, because you will map such a bizarre level of negativity that sooner or later, whether it takes a few lifetimes or what, you're going to think, oh my God, this is no way to behave. This is crazy. I am mapping negative polarity, really, really, really far out, far from the source, far from clarity. Gosh, I've gone a long way, on this journey of stupidity, and almost pat them on the back and say, wow, you really have. You've delved deeply into ignorance. Incredible. Well done. Now come back, because you'll have to in the end, but, there's a limited utilitarian purpose in allowing oneself to just fester and to just entertain oneself. It runs out of juice after a while, and it becomes very, very unsatisfying, and you feel that you would need, some sort of nitro injection up your backside to make anything exciting happen in life. And it's because you've mistaken the positive and negative polarities from the television as the real thing, and it isn't like that at all. So you have to turn it off.
Oh, clearly. That's interesting when you said that our TV here in the United States is actually broadcast everywhere. And I think for especially people who don't travel out of the United States, which is a lot of us.
It's 70% of Americans
yeah.
don't ever leave. That's right.
Yeah, or not even do they leave their city.
Yes.
So they can't imagine the far-reaching effects of our culture on the world at large. I myself used to live in Italy, and the Italian news is just as bad as, and the Italian shows just as bad as the American shows. Although
they don't bother to disguise the corruption in Italy, do they? They just put it right there in front of your face.
Yeah, it's very different. It's very blatant and out there. And for myself at the time, I was like, oh, I'm learning to speak the language better, so watching TV is a good thing.
Yeah.
But I can see how I've used it in my life, and I think a lot of people do, as a default activity. Oh, I don't know what else to do. I'll just watch television. And you can get lost in a world that you don't even realize how bad you feel until you've taken some time away from television and then gone back to it. And then it just becomes very displeasing. And so I'm so glad that I think more and more people are stepping away from the television, especially the younger generation.
Yeah.
As they're very into, YouTube, and kind of, at least with YouTube, you get to watch things that you want to watch when you want to watch them, and there usually are not ads that you have to watch.
Well, yeah, I mean, you raise some very interesting points in what you've just said. I mean, the first thing is, a heartfelt, absolute congratulations on getting rid of your television. That's just awesome. More people need to follow your example. That is not easy to do because, as you say, it's a very simple thing, which is, as you call it, it's the default thing to do, isn't it? You get home, you've had a busy day or whatever, flop down on the couch, get a glass of wine or a cup of tea or a coffee, whatever it is for you, and flick the television on, right? And it's like, well, what else are you going to do? You don't feel like reading a book. You don't want to listen to music. Maybe there's no one else there to talk to at that moment. What else are you going to do? And if you have exhausted yourself in the day to the extent where your emotional and physical and mental faculties have been depleted, television's great because it doesn't really involve anything from you. All you have to do is witness it. And that's the point, that what we're doing in the day is wrong. Because if what you were doing in the day was phenomenally good, you wouldn't watch television, because it would be a very pale imitation of the amazing, vivid wonderment of what you're actually doing in the real world. Why the hell would you watch this fake reality full of nonsense on television? You wouldn't. So if you watch a lot of TV and sedate yourself with it, you're probably not doing anything anywhere near your potential in your daily life. And that, again, is a brilliant path, because you're going to fundamentally arrive at a signpost that says, hey, sucker, you're not being authentic. You're not doing what you should be doing. You're not realizing your potential. What you should be doing is just aligning yourself with what you're capable of. That's all you should be doing. What that is up to you. And how long it takes is up to you. But underneath everything is this compulsion to be the best we can be, and to grow to a clarity of being where the divinity of the universe, in my view, is absolutely expressed through us, and we can channel it and communicate with it and be it. Absolutely, because that's what we do, that's what we are. So to live in this fake, separate world through the television is absolutely crazy. And I think it is very important to understand why might we be sedating ourselves with it. And I think it does have a legitimate entertainment value. Like I like film noir, for example, like old black and white movies from the 40s and 50s and 60s, mostly the 40s and 50s. And I will collect those now and again and watch some of those. And if I've had a busy day, I want to just mong out, as we say colloquially in Manchester, and just zone out and sit down, get some chips or whatever and just watch a movie for an hour or two. Great. That is a lovely experience. It's very important, though, that it's what you choose. And as more and more people start to create their own channels and media and stuff, you have to be very careful with that, because YouTube and Google and Facebook do not provide standard search results and standard information. It is very, very closely filtered, filter bubbles they call it, to particular parameters of what you do and what you watch, where you are, what kind of computer you've got, what browser you've got, what other things you've got in your search history. You're not getting standard results when you search on Google, even if you don't log in. You're not getting standard results. If you search on 100 different laptops around the world with different people on different browsers with different backgrounds in different parts of the culture, you will get 100 different sets of results on identical search terms. So you have to be very conscious about what you think is your choice. So you have to use a browser that is absolutely pure, one of which is one called DuckDuckGo.com. Little plug for them. That's a pure browser, in the sense, not a browser, I beg your pardon, a search engine, in the sense that you're getting unfiltered results, you're getting real results. So if you search on a particular topic, like, I don't know, Slovenia or cypress trees or Hamilton watches, you're going to get standard results. Everyone gets the same thing, which is unfiltered, pure results. So even when you think you're choosing your own stuff, you're getting steered in a certain direction unless you're using a pure tool through your browser, which I suggest people have a think about that, because although Google's very useful, of course, Facebook's very useful, Twitter's very useful, all that, it's highly personalized, and some of it is not opt-outable. You have to do it. So my suggestion is you build your own media, and you absolutely decide on what you're going to do yourself. Build an offline archive from your friends, beg, borrow, steal, whatever, to get things, but obviously don't do anything illegal, but get things for your own archive of audiobooks, of PDFs, of movies, get a film off a friend, borrow the box set if you want to watch The Sopranos or something. Get the box set of the first 5 seasons. It's much better doing it that way than watching them on TV. And go and enjoy that, and you've got, weeks of material there. And you're choosing it. There's no filtering there. There's no commercials. I would never use anything like Netflix, personally, because I think there's better, cleverer ways of doing that, which are totally legitimate and legal and upstanding, where you just have a network of material that you swap between each other. It's like, sometimes you see in coffee shops, there's like a shelf with books, and you can just take it and read it and then bring it back, or put one of your own books there one day. And in some places in Portland, they do that with movies, and you can just bring stuff in, leave it there, say, hey, this is cool or whatever. And you trust in the people, so you're hoping that some idiot isn't going to come in and just steal it all. But on the whole, it means that people can swap media amongst themselves. You don't need a third party to do it. And as your little network of media people grows, you don't need Netflix. You don't need to download stuff. You just swap it offline and share it amongst yourselves. And you can even set up your own legal torrents of it to say, well, let's share it amongst ourselves, what we legally own, electronically. So build your own media, and build your own media network, sharing network as well, I say.
I think that's a great idea. And I already am in the process with my friend and colleague. She finds so many videos that I never would find, and then she refers them to me, and then I find things, and then I send them back to her. And
Yeah.
if you were to do a basic search on YouTube, I mean, it's horrendous. What, like, the most viewed videos? It's just as bad as the television.
Chasing a laser pointer, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very. I don't know. I just. Yeah, I feel like I could continue to go on about TV for a long time, but I want to make sure to get to some of the other questions.
Right, yeah. I know, you're absolutely right. We could go on about this.
Yeah.
The thing that's interesting about what you just said, let's close this piece with that, is that if somebody knew you, says, well, Claudia's she's a great woman, she knows all this stuff. If you said to someone, look, I've just seen these 3 or 4 films recently, absolutely phenomenal, I really recommend those. Let's not underestimate the power of that recommendation. Or if somebody said, well, Neil Kramer, he's a decent guy, and he said that such and such a book is red hot, is phenomenal. I think I'm going to get that from the library and read it. And you're building your input on a very, very natural and organic and safe and reliable system, which is people's personal recommendations, not on lists on YouTube, not on what most people watch. What most people watch is shit. There's no question about it. That's no guide for what's good. What's popular is not what's good. That's something completely different. Mm-hmm. If you had a network of 50 or 500 or 50,000 cool people who are interested in real things of meaning and of artistic merit and of substance and beauty, then you're going to say, well, I'll tell you what, there's so much material swishing around these excellent people. I've not got enough life to watch it all. But sure enough, if I want to sit down on a Friday night for 2 or 3 hours and enjoy a bit of televisual entertainment, I can just pull something down from this very high quality personal network of real people. And that's the way to do it, I think.
And that's brilliant. I love that idea. So I might borrow that one from you. What I would be really interested in finding out is you are from England and you've been living here in the States, you said, for about 2 years now. Mm-hmm. And I know you've done a lot of traveling. I know that I've heard you talk about your travels with your friend and colleague KMO, the guy who has the podcast called Sea Realm.
Yes.
Yeah, and I haven't gotten a chance to listen to the audio yet, the files for that trip that you did take and the people that you met, but
I'll send you a copy of that.
Oh, yeah. That would be great.
No problem.
I'd really like to hear what, given what people see in the mainstream media about American culture, what did you notice in actually meeting real people in your travels, and what is your opinion of the American people?
In Britain, in the 80s, we had a Prime Minister called Margaret Thatcher. I'm sure you've heard of her.
Sure.
And she was around for the same sort of spell of time as Ronald Reagan. And we had these two very bizarre, hyper-materialist concepts of Thatcherism and Reaganomics, right? Mm-hmm. And as any decent esoteric researcher into global politics and parapolitics and so on will know, nothing to do with Thatcher or Reagan. The philosophies behind what they created were absolutely devised by someone else. So they didn't create anything, they just executed other people's plans. Mm-hmm. And at that time, a very, very important perception was put forward in Britain about America, which was American people are a bit stupid and very introverted and arrogant. And a lot of shows on television in the 80s were satirizing that viewpoint and saying, look how fat they are and silly, and look how they don't know anything about anything else in the world, right? Mm-hmm. And to some extent, that's been ingrained in everybody who's in the 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s. But young people, it's not so much anymore. It's much more globally, harmonized now in a relatively okay way, I think. But when I came to the States first, I was immediately shocked by how nice American people are. That's the first thing.
Mm.
And I also realized that what was seen as arrogance in this fake perception in 1980s Britain is actually independence. And I have been hugely impressed, just personally speaking, so whatever, but just this person here has been hugely impressed with how many American people are very independently minded naturally. And like, well, no one's kind of the boss of me. I do what I want to do. And the people in the sheriff's office and in the county and in the Senate, we tell them what to do. And if they get totally out of hand, then that's not acceptable. But even in the cultural level, people's independence is very, very different here in a good way compared to many places I've been to in Europe, where people are more accustomed to being told what to do, and that, well, life's kind of shit and you just have to get on with it. And they're more accustomed to being subjugated to monarchical hierarchy. Over here, there is no history. There isn't any. You know, the furthest we go back is the Native American indigenous peoples, and that's recent history. Ancient history of the American continent, there isn't one. Nobody knows what was there. It's been wiped from the record. Go back beyond a certain point, nobody has a clue what happened on this continent. It's very interesting. It's the only place on Earth with no history. Very, very fascinating idea, that. So part of my personal study while I've been here is to understand the significance of North America in particular, also South America, but mainly North America, in a certain kind of consciousness that is possible here that is difficult to achieve on a big level anywhere else. Now, I haven't travelled massively in Asia, so I can't really talk about that, to be honest. So it might be different there. I don't think it is, but it might be. I'd have to go there and smell it and feel it to say that. But other than that, I have travelled very, very widely into, you know, most great cities and states and centres of population gathering in Europe and America and most states that I've visited here. I feel this tremendous empowerment personally in people, not necessarily in how they express that, but in their attitude is very, very healthy. And whether they're sort of 60-year-old right-wing Republicans and, you know, don't really like people who are brown and they're very bigoted, or whether they're very, very liberal, cosmopolitan, lovely people who are very open-minded, who have no silly ideas about race or ethnicity, all the heart of those people is kind of pointing in the right direction. And any bigotry and racism and ethnic ignorance is in error. It's a mistake. It's not the kind of fueled hatred that I've seen in many places in Europe, for example. So the other observation is the racial mixing here works a hell of a lot better than it does in Britain. A hell of a lot better. Because essentially everyone here is from somewhere else, and there's no illusion of this ancient white Anglo-Saxon Protestant being, you know, as something, well, it's our place. There's no illusions of that here as such. So although there are, of course, tensions and problems like anywhere, the way the races mix here, different kinds of people with different kinds of consciousness from different parts of the world, it works really quite well on the whole. That has been a massive pleasant surprise. So, yeah, I can't help, of course, but notice the cultural differences between America and Britain as I go around. And most of them are good ones. And there's tons of things in Britain that are cool that don't exist here. And there's tons of things in America that are cool that don't exist in Britain. So there's always, you know, a little of each. But the general independence of the average American person, I think, makes this game of kind of political, economic chess quite interesting at the moment, because America is a very, very difficult place to control. Because, as I say, even the thickest, most bigoted, blind, ignorant Americans have this fierce sense of independence, which I haven't seen in Europe on a large scale. My friends in Europe are dead conscious and dead independent. The kind of people I hang out with and the kind of people I talk to are super cool and full of beans and full of energy and have got all their own shit going on, and they're great human beings. But normal, mainstream, conditioned people don't have that level of spiritual, economic, political, mental independence that they do here. So that's been the main thing that strikes me on a regular basis.
Well, that's nice to hear. That's actually reaffirming that things are improving here. It's interesting. When I was living in Italy, I wanted to stay there because I felt like that exact same thing, that America's full of stupid people, and Bush Bush was in office at the time, and I just wanted to stay there. And then the longer that I was there, I started to notice the same kind of problems were there that were also here in the United States. So
yeah, you do. And the funny thing about Italy and France in particular is they have such a rich and sexy, brilliant culture. And if you like food and people and music and art and fashion and civilized human social conduct, you can absolutely have a wonderful escapist fantasy life in France and Italy in particular. A really, really wonderful time. And yet, when you get past that, and when the buttons are popping off your shirt because you've put so much weight on, and you just think, well, I can't eat any more of this fabulous pasta, and I can't drink any more of these wonderful, wines. Then you start looking a bit deeper, and you realize what an extraordinary spiritual poverty there is in those two countries. Now, anyone who's listening there, don't get your knickers in a twist, because we know that everywhere there are fabulous, intelligent, conscious people. But again, I'm talking about the mainstream cultural norm is like introverted, very introverted. And I've discussed this with a number of people before, but when I look at my stats, there is a definite shortage of people from certain European countries where you think, well, that's funny because there's masses of people in the States, masses in Canada and the UK, there's masses in Belgium, there's masses in countries we don't talk about a lot, like Estonia and Hungary and Poland and Lithuania and stuff. And yet these huge entities like Germany and France and Spain and Italy, not so much. Not so much. It's very mainstream focused there. And even when you get this cultural snobbery where they're like, well, we're not mainstream because we listen to Wagner and Puccini and we only drink $100 bottles of wine and the finest goat's cheese, kind of blended from goodness knows what, even that kind of cultural level of high snobbery where you say, well, we're the nice people. We're the successful, sophisticated, urbane, nice people. There is still this tragic level of spiritual poverty, which is no different to the sort of Budweiser baseball watching crowd. No different at all. It's the same thing. So I think that once you get past the cultural smokescreen and say, well, that's very nice statues, nice wine, whatever, nice stuff. Once you get past that and you look at what's actually going on in the hearts and minds of the people, you find it's to some degree the same as everywhere else, which people want happy, peaceful, productive, social, wonderful lives. That's what everyone wants, right? Nobody wants to go to war. Nobody wants corrupt, idiot business people in government. Nobody wants that. But you do find that there are concentrations of conscious people. There are focused areas of people into we have to do this for ourselves. And they do fall in Britain and Canada and North America in particular. They do. And I think that's very, very, very hard to argue against. And it's a funny thing to say because obviously I know some fabulous German people, I really do. And some, just cool people from all over the world. And South Africa, I have family in South Africa, really excellent people. But on the whole, I would say that California and Oregon and Washington State have more conscious people than anywhere else I've seen in the world. Anywhere. It's unbelievable. Now, if you want culture and you want literature and you want music and you want dynamism, I would go and live in New York because it's phenomenal, you know, and I've really enjoyed it, and it is one of my favorite cities. It's amazing. But to try and get people to shift away from the mainstream into this massive path of ascendant spiritual growth is very difficult in New York. People don't want to talk about that so much. They do here in Oregon naturally more, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's hard to ignore that. And it's a funny thing to say because you're making these huge sweeping generalizations, and it's bound to upset a few people. But what I say is, look at the principle of this, not necessarily the granular detail, because that's always subject to change, and everybody is getting better slowly but surely. But why are the concentrations at certain places? And I think it's to do with the land itself. So the land is where I go, not the people. It's the land. The land accommodates certain types of growth in certain types of people, and that is hard to ignore. And my favourite places in Britain, it was the same thing. And in these wonderful, wonderful places where there's this ancient energy in the land, these natural vortices in the land, something I'm going to talk about at a workshop in August, actually, you can feel it. And it supports transition, and it supports human beings, and it supports a movement from one way of being to another way of being. It's hard to do that on your own, but if the land, let us say, if the environment, if the universal concentration in particular locations supports that, it's a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, it's definitely, you know, I used to live in the Bay Area for about 14 years, and you know, from just out of college, I moved there. And now I'm here and back where I'm from in New York, and I really don't fit in with the way people are here. I don't really care about material things. And I realize now, I was actually watching an interview with Michael Tsarian from, God, it was like from 2000, and he was living in the Bay Area at the time, and he was saying that the people there, particularly in the Bay Area, were very open to this information, and they were not symbol illiterate, and they were focused on consciousness. And I realized I kind of took that for granted. It was, you know, everybody knows about metaphysics there. Everybody's on a spiritual path. And then you come to New York, and it's almost like I'm speaking Italian to people. They don't understand.
There's definitely, you have to say, don't you, that if you go in from one coast to another, culturally, people will joke, won't they, about how different people are. And I love the New York sort of attitude most of the time. I think it's really funny and healthy. You know, there's not many people in America where, you know, I think, you know, you could put off a nuclear bomb in the middle of Manhattan and flatten the whole freaking place. And the next morning they'd be out there rebuilding it with a smile on their face saying, hey, what the hell, let's just get on with it. And that sort of toughness is very impressive, and I like that. I actually like that. But you have to say that, like you say, the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, you know, and then going up into the Oregon region to Eugene and Salem and Portland, Olympia, Seattle, into Washington. Things change there. There's a different attitude, and it's like, yeah, we know that it's not about material stuff. We know there's what some people might call a spiritual aspect to life that's very, very foundational. We know that, and it's just something that filters through the collective consciousness here, and it's not a big surprise. I don't have to warm up an audience to that when I'm over here. If I speak on a different scale to people elsewhere, I do have to warm them up to that idea first. I have to earn a little bit of trust so I can use certain terminology. I don't have to do that over here. People are like, yeah, we know about that. Yeah, it's okay to say divinity. We're not going to piss our pants when you say that. It's all right. We don't mind that. And if we don't like the word divinity, we'll swap it with something else. We get that. We're not going to get too, you know, cute and prudish about the language. Elsewhere, where they have a more reductionist view, that's not possible. I have to do an awful lot of work just to set the ground for it. So sometimes, you know, particularly with live audiences, I like doing that because it makes my game sharper, and I respect my audiences absolutely every single time. So there's no way really that I'm going to kind of mess that up. It's more of a challenge, and it takes longer to get to the information, and I share less though, because that's, if you've only got a limited period of time, that's obviously going to happen. And again, that is localized. It's not just about the culture, it's about the land, it's about the people. And if you go back, particularly where there's a richer historical record, like in Europe, you'll find that that was the case 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. It was also the same. And you have to be very discerning to draw that out of this very sort of anemic historical accounts. But you can sense, like, yeah, Portland people were still different a long time ago. Yeah, people from Bristol in England were different a long time ago. Yeah, people in the far sort of west of Wales were different in Pembrokeshire a long time ago. They have a rich history. Why is that? Well, there was a heavy druidic presence there. There was a spiritual imbuement, if you like, with certain types of consciousness in that physical location. And some people say that you can put that resonator into the stone, into the physical land itself. And so sometimes when you get these megalithic structures, of which there are many in America, and more people are cottoning onto that fact, funnily enough, particularly in sort of Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine area, but also over here as well, that the stones are actually like machines to resonate that, so it's not forgotten.
It's almost like it's stored in the cellular memory of the earth.
Yeah, that's right. It's like sort of organic hard drives or whatever.
You know, I'm interested in hearing about your time in England, specifically visiting these megalithic structures, and also I know that for a time you were very interested in crop circles. So do you have anything to say about that in terms of the energy of the land and the people? Or
yeah, it's funny. Crop circles, yeah. I've visited probably about 200 crop circles over the last 10 years. So I've seen more crop circles than most people you'll ever encounter, right? Now, there are certain croppies, as they call themselves, who obviously have done thousands. And every single one that ever occurs, they'll go and have a look at them and make all kinds of analysis and stuff. And generally speaking, they're just like the loveliest people in the world, by the way. They're kind of like science fiction geeks, you know, go to like conventions. Like, they might look a bit odd from the outside, but when you get and talk to them, you think, wow, what lovely, warm, interesting, involved human beings. You know, what a heartening thing to see. And so I have a lot of time for croppies. Anyway, at the end of the day, for me, the crop circle phenomena has moved more and more away from who does it, how do they do it, to what does it mean for one's personal growth. And there's a chapter in my book, The Unfoldment, called Paradox, I think off the top of my head, and it goes into that, and there's some accounts of experiences with crop circles, very, very, very unique ones, I would say. And I kind of unpack what it means and go into greater detail there. But essentially, there is a component which I like to correlate with the Japanese Zen koan, which is a kind of mental trick to disturb the brain's normal pattern of discursive thinking, i.e. linear logical reasoning, to say, right, I'm going to show you something here, but I'm going to do it in such a way that I'm going to show you that the answer to this riddle cannot be achieved with your normal way of thinking. And that's what crop circles do for me. They're like physical koans, you know, like the sound of one hand clapping. And, you know, there's all these classic sort of Zen problems, like, if you see the Buddha, what do you say to him? And, you know, they try and say, oh, I am your student, I am the Buddha. And, you know, you just get hit over the head with a bamboo stick and you keep giving the wrong answer. And the teacher essentially is trying to get the student to think in a different way, and fundamentally to know in a completely non-thinking way altogether, to have direct experience with knowledge. It's a little bit, we could say it's analogous to, in the movie The Matrix, you know, Trinity doesn't learn how to fly a helicopter. She makes direct contact with knowing how to fly a helicopter. She doesn't go through the linear process. It's downloaded right into her head. So if you imagine knowledge is an object, you just put the object right there in your head and you've got it. You don't have to go through the linear process of learning. That's what a koan's trying to do. It's trying to say, to know something, you have to merge with it. In Robert Heinlein's 1960s book, Stranger in a Strange Land, he calls it grokking, Grokking. So to grok something means that you understand it so fully that you actually are able to merge with it. And in that merging, you become part of it. And so when you grok something, you know it in such a profound way that you begin to erase the separation between objects and subjects, and it becomes one thing. And crop circles do that because they're so phenomenal, they're so unusual, and they bring you inevitably to certain points on the land, which is very significant. And 90% of world crop circles occur in one county, in one country, which is Wiltshire in England. And the reason for that is because of the land. There's something very special about that land. And some people make crop circles with planks and string and ropes and board. Some military people fire technology into the field and make their own stuff. Some of them occur by different means, which is not clear as of yet. And there are many different types of crop circles. And what I have learned over the years is that you learn to distinguish by a very clear feeling what is, let's say, a genuine crop circle, i.e. it's not made by men of our time in any way using any technology. It's something else. And you feel that in your body, basically. You can't see it on a screen. You can't read about it in a book. You have to go and walk in it, take your shoes and socks off and feel it. And when you go in a genuine crop circle, you have to treat it a little bit like you're walking into a beautiful, brilliant temple. And you go in with a certain mindset of stillness and openness and a little bit of reverence. Not necessarily deferential, but a little bit of healthy reverence, right? And when you do that, your sort of spiritual antenna open up and you can feel what's going on. And usually it's a feeling that you feel right in the center of your portal mechanisms, your chakra, your central green, what some people call heart chakra. You can feel this pulsation right there. And it's like if you've ever fallen in love deeply and madly and insanely, it's a bit like that. You feel this kind of like everything's okay, and you feel this pumping and this anticipation, this kind of breathlessness. First time I thought I was just having a heart attack and I just got up the hill too fast and I was going to keel over and die. But that wasn't the case because it happens nearly every time, and it's an attunement with what's going on. And when you go into a different crop circle, one that's made by men of our time, you can still feel a resonance, but it's not there, it's in your head. So it's an intellectual resonance, it's a mind resonance, i.e. it's a linear, logical thing of the third density. When it's from the heart, it's telling me that it's from something else. It's what I would call ultra-terrestrial, not necessarily extra, like off or out. It's of the actual space itself, but from a different density. It's from something different, from a long time ago. They are essentially taking place atemporally, not in this dimension. What we're seeing is an imprint of something else. So it's a big topic, but the real punchline is that in going to see crop circles, and it's usually sort of April to September time, so they're just kind of starting to hot up now. June, July, August is the prime season, really. You will experience, I would pretty much, a good bet on this, 80% bet, an acceleration of whatever transitions you're currently creating in your life, whether that's with relationships, people, jobs, finances, projects, creativity, whatever. Whatever little transitions and evolutions are underway will deepen and accelerate by virtue of being in these special vortices in the land. And that has happened when I talk to certain people who are open to that idea and who are truthful enough to be able to track it and speak it and say it with heart, they all say that and say, oh my God, I can't believe you've said that. And then they tell me a big story. And the story, the details are always different, but the principle is always the same. I was doing X, Y, and Z, and suddenly I was really doing X, Y, and Z in an inescapably committed fashion.
That's really cool. As you said, the comment about the heart chakra and really feeling that pulse of the energy, or maybe the message that's coming from them, that made me think about, and I know you've mentioned Drambala Melchizedek in one of the interviews that you were in, I think that was with Red Ice Radio, but he's talking about now that the whole process is with this new paradigm shift, that people have to move from the head into the heart, and that we can no longer, it's like, I think if we're trusting always our mind and our thoughts, then we're really not going to know where we're supposed to go.
Yeah, I actually did an interview on this thing called the Spirit of Mart Network, which is part of his creation. So one of his colleagues interviewed me. I don't actually know much about the guy. I've read a couple of his works and listened to him speak once or twice as an MP3 file, but I don't know a lot about him, so I can't quite recall that. But I can say that the principle that you just described, if that's what he's talking about, has been very significant in my life, particularly in the last 5 years, and lots of personal and professional, shall we say, changes in my life. Obviously, moving from Britain to America, leaving some very special people behind, and meeting some more wonderful special people here. Obviously, that has a big personal effect on your life, and you can be very blasé and like, oh yeah, on the radio and stuff. But of course, it has a huge impact. It changes the way you feel. And when we put the headset off and click close on this call in a little while, we go into our real lives. We go into the stuff we're doing. We go into, you open the refrigerator and get the milk out. You're doing real things. And who's sharing that space with you? Who is doing the work with you? Who is on the edges of your reality? Those are real issues. And if you map that into what you're talking about, which is switching your consciousness, not just through this particular frequency of, let us say, communication and reason, those sort of chakras, as the Hindus would put it, or portals, as other people have said since and before. But if you switch it to say, well, why limit consciousness to just that part of the bandwidth, that part of the spectrum? It's like saying, well, I'm an artist, but I'm only ever going to paint in red. And you're saying, well, that's great, that's super duper, particularly when you're drawing, chili peppers, that's going to come in handy. But what about when you're doing the ocean? You're going to miss something there. In fact, you might not even be able to represent it at all. And it's just the same to me. It's like thinking of it as colour, to say, well, you're missing a lot out if all your consciousness is filtered exclusively through, let's say, your reason, your intellect. Very, very important, useful tools, no doubt about it. But if you ever meet somebody, particularly, let us call them academics, who exclusively lives in that realm, they're very, very one-dimensional people. They can remember a lot of names and dates, and they've read a lot of books, and they can masturbate forth with their intellect, let us say. And you can go, wow, look at those kind of, linguistic ejaculations. Aren't you impressive? That's really, really lovely. However, I wouldn't go on a road trip with you, you boring bastard. And I wouldn't want to sit on a roof on New Year's Eve with you and drink a bottle of whiskey with you. I wouldn't want to do that with you. Because you don't have that fullness. I wouldn't, I wouldn't do X, Y, and Z. You can get the principle of this. You're looking for a full human being who has that mental faculty, who has the ability to understand music and art, and who understands the importance of emotional intelligence and of sexual awareness and of intimate articulations. How do you communicate philosophically with someone at the intimate level? Because you can't just go on and on and on. How do you do that? What tools and techniques do you use to do that? How do you be properly intimate with another human being, not just physically and erotically, but anybody that you want to be intimate with, anybody, your mother, your friend, the guy at the bar that you think, you're cool, you know. We get into a position where intimacy is appropriate, and it's something we can openly do as normal, fully functional human beings. And I think the movement from the head to the heart is one of 7, let us say, if we're going to talk about chakras, is one of 7 possible movements. And it's a pivotal one. But there are others as well, like the will, you know, exercising your will in the world as free will, as sovereign will, as authentic will, is just as important as your heart. Just as important. But people don't really think about that because we don't have any reference point to talk about these things in the mainstream narrative. And like I said to somebody yesterday, if someone had started talking to me about heart chakras 10 years ago, I'd have just thought, oh my God, just shut up. And I'd have turned off because it doesn't sound very appealing to a masculine mindset, heart chakras. It sounds like fluffy nonsense. So you have to frame it a certain way so it's acceptable to somebody who looks at it in a certain way, to say, look, you can't ignore this. This is part of your conscious apparatus. And if you've got these 7 portals, these 7 transducers, these 7 transceivers for operating in the world as a divine conscious entity, and you're only using one of them, you're going to have a very, very flimsy, feeble experience. And it doesn't matter how cool you are with that one portal. You could be Einstein. The rest of it's going to look a mess. So the game is understanding that you can use all of these things to express yourself consciously and to channel divine consciousness, which is what consciousness is. It's a divine emanation. It's one thing that we hook into, I think. And finding balance where, as the environment changes and as the sort of pulsations from the sun change, as the lunar pulsations change, you know yourself, some days you get up and you're full of energy, and other days you kind of think, oh, I'm just a bit whimsical today. I might just kind of go and write a poem on the side of a hill. And another day you have to sit down and do like damned hard spreadsheets all day or something. And I think, oh my God, this is a totally different way of organizing consciousness. You have to be able to do all that in a way. You have to find the balance point of all those things and say, spirituality without critical reason can go off track really, really fast, and people end up in a right mess. And I'm sure if you have been walking your path, you know some spiritual people who cannot conduct themselves very well. They're lovely and they've got big hearts, but they're all over the fucking place. They don't know how to organize themselves, and they don't have any discipline. And the other side of it, where you've got very organized, very disciplined people with no heart. So you can pin it on those two things and say, well, the head and the heart are very important reference points. But there are these other structures, there are these other energy transducers, I like to think of them as, that can modulate consciousness and transform it and transliterate that different kind of information into a personal thing. And we call them emotions typically. And a lot of emotional language, which is what's going to be, articulated to some degree in the book. You'll read about this. A lot of emotional impulses. What is it? It's incoming consciousness that you're filtering through a different portal, a different energy portal. That's what it is. It's just like light coming in. It's just like anything coming in, sound, touch, whatever. Some things come in as pure energy, and you feel it as something that we call an emotion. They're not, strictly speaking, generated from yourself. They're things that we pick up around us. And if you've ever met any truly clairvoyant and psychic people, they're usually quite emotional people. And there's a reason for that, because that's where the psychic power comes through.
I think that's probably very relevant, especially now with all the changes that you're, even touching upon, the lunar changes, the solar changes, and I can't tell you how many people I've spoken with who notice. They're saying, I don't know what's going on, but my emotions are really rocking my world lately, and I feel like stuff is just continuously coming up for us to process and release in order to move on to a higher dimension.
Yeah, and the issue with that is, and I know exactly what you mean, and I have some very super duper people who are in that boat who say to me, "Hey, God, Neil, I don't know what it is, but I'm really feeling, the incoming energies, and there's this and there's that, and there's this solar flare and this electromagnetic pulse. And I'm like, I'm starting to distinguish between the people who say that and then just go, whoa, and just use that as an excuse for being in a mess. And the people who feel that and think, right, well, that's what's going on. Now, what am I going to do about that? How am I going to deal with that? How am I going to transform that energy in the alchemy of my being? Because people, if you don't realize that you can do that, you end up receiving input but not doing anything with it. So stuff comes in, you receive it and just go, whoa, yeah, I can feel it. And then you just think, well, that means I'll just sit on the couch all day and be depressed. Or I'll sit on the couch all day and get very excited, or I'll run through the streets and rip my clothes off. It's like, well, you're receiving something. Well done, that's brilliant. Not everyone can do that. So your sensitivity is at such a level where you're receiving something. Next, what do you do with that? And that's what you have to ask yourself immediately when you pick up on stuff. What do you do with it? Because you have to acknowledge that you can sort of alchemize this stuff and do something with it and act appropriately, because your divine will gives you the power to do whatever you want with it. And the more honorable it is, let's use a word as a shortcut, the more honorable it is, the more power you have. If it's dishonorable, you can still do stupid shit, but it's going to lack power, and it's going to eventually catch up with you and bite your head off. But if you act with what we would call honor, which I think is a very useful word, then most of that power is going to translate very directly into your manifestations, into what you create in your life.
Oh, clearly. And just brilliant. The information you're offering today is really great, and I'm so glad that we got to talk about your book. And I look forward to finishing your book and kind of repeating some of this in a greater detail. And as you mentioned, we are coming to the end of the interview here. And so I just wanted to briefly mention that I know you have an event at the end of June at Iseti Ranch. And is that detailed on your website, neilkramer.com? And
yeah, if you go to neilkramer.com, there's like an events menu, a button at the top, and you click on events, it'll tell you the sort of 2 or 3 upcoming things, and that'll roll through as things come about. So yeah, there's the 2012 Global Transformation Conference, which takes place sort of last weekend in June, which I'll be speaking at, and also there's a panel talk there as well. I'll be on the panel, and it's the sort of conference where there's a lot of people wandering about and everyone talks to each other. So anybody who wants to get involved and have a chat and share a beer or whatever, it's the kind of thing where you can do that. Very, very high quality conference. I mean, people might hear me saying that thinking, yeah, what, because you're going to it and speaking. No, because I went to it kind of blind the first time, being invited and thinking, I think I like these guys, let's see what it's like. Great bunch of people, great team effort of what goes on up there, and essentially a sacred space up in Washington State, actually just over the way from Hood River in Oregon. Very special place. Several hundred people come and gather there, and it's a big conscious gathering with a load of very, very fascinating speakers. And the energy and the focus of integrity is very, 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 very high. And so if anybody feels they might need a bit of an injection of that, get some new incoming vectors, let your guard down, speak to your brothers and sisters, have a cool time. That is the event to go to. I absolutely promise you, you won't be disappointed. And then after that, there is a workshop over in that neck of the woods again later on at the end of August, which is a workshop I'm giving called Unfoldment, Secrets and Synchronicity, which is like a full day workshop with like group discussion and stuff the next day. So yeah, details of all that stuff is on my website, neilkramer.com.
Excellent. And if people want to contact you, they can through your website as well?
They can. There's a contact section on there, and those emails pretty much come direct to me. If I'm out and about, someone else will help me with that. But most of the time, the emails come direct to me. And obviously, you can buy the book there. You can buy DVDs. You can buy other things. But yeah, it's all nicely organized in one place, so you can check me out and what I do and get to all my material.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Neil. It was such a pleasure talking with you today, and I hope that maybe we can have you back on the show in the future.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed speaking to you.
Great. Me too. Thank you so much, and take care. You can find out more about Neil Kramer, his events, his book, and some of his other recorded programs that he sells, which are excellent, at neilkramer.com. I'm your host, CJ Miller, and you've been listening to Whole Earth Healing Radio. Thanks for joining us. You can also check out my website, wholeearthhealing.com, to find out more about my services as a counselor, hypnotist, and Reiki and energy healer. You can also find all of my archive shows there. So thanks again for joining us, and have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.